Welcome to Behind the Book. It's time now for Behind the Book, hosted by Tess Thompson and Karen McQuestion, two authors with a passion for books, no filters, and limitless curiosity. Join them now to find out the real story behind your favorite books and authors. And now, Behind the Book.
Welcome to another episode of Behind the Book. I'm here with Karen McQuestion, my amazing co-star. Yes, we're stars.
Co-star. I'll take it.
Yeah, right? So what has been going on in your world? I've been gone, so I feel like I haven't talked to you in forever.
I know, you have been gone. I missed you. And you're being gone. You had a family emergency a while back, and then you had an already planned trip, and I understand it threw you off your game.
It did, yeah. I've been thrown off my game really since, my dad's heart attack was on Mother's Day. So I got the call that day, and then I went down there for 2.5 weeks. And I just feel like ever since then I'm behind. But yeah, we had already had this trip. I always take my girls down in July to see my parents. So, they were super excited about it, so I didn't feel like I could cancel. Plus, I kind of wanted to go down and see how my dad was doing. And my mom had an operation that we were hoping she would be in better shape when we saw her, but she was struggling, so it was actually good that we were down there. But it's, when you run a business, and especially when it's an artistic type of business where you are the creator of things, getting behind is stressful. But the novel that I was behind on when my dad had the heart attack when I was down there, I did get finished and did release on time, and that was last Tuesday. So that was good, and it's been doing great, and I'm excited because that series is kind of taken off. It's the Emerson Past Contemporaries. They're now in KU, and I think that was a good decision. So for anybody thinking about KU, the series seem to do really well, especially romance.
And you have to give the title of the book.
Oh, The Correspondent of Emerson Pass, and there's this really cute guy on the cover. I think we've talked about that before.
Yes, we have.
And our friend Pamela Kelly was like, it'll be interesting to see if, the sexy guy ends up doing better than your other titles. So the jury's still out.
Well, and what's sexy about him is his facial expression. Like, he really looks like he's looking right at the reader, right from the cover to the reader, kind of like, so that was very appealing, I thought.
Yeah. But anyway, so that's what's been going on in my world, and I'm just slowly catching up this week. And we bought my daughter a car yesterday. My other daughter's getting her license this week. So it's just been a lot of family stuff, but I'm back now, and hopefully we'll be settling into a better work routine here in a few weeks.
You did not miss a deadline for publication, but you went beyond the point of view that you wanted to.
And, my family's always like, well, don't you work for yourself? Like, why would you have a deadline? It's like, well, because I'm sending it to an editor who also has a lot of other clients. And so if I'm late, then I mess up her schedule. But both times, this book that I just sent to her and The Correspondent were both late, but she was able to work with me, which is great. So I didn't have to change pre-order dates.
Yeah, because you hate to do that. People are waiting and they're excited about the book, and
absolutely.
You don't want to let anyone down, especially all your readers that have been anticipating this for a while, because with your series, you have people that finish a book and then jump right on and pre-order the next one, which is really nice.
Hopefully. Yeah. That's what we want. But what's happening in your world? I'm taking all the time here.
I have a new book coming out at the end of August, and I've been doing that pre-launch marketing. I started something different this time. I am on TikTok, and so I did some outreach to some reader reviewers there, because I don't think they're my usual readers. It's kind of a younger demographic, and they've been pretty receptive. I've had quite a number of them say it sounded intriguing and they'd love to read it. So,
well, yeah, and this book especially, I feel like would really appeal to younger people, since it's kind of the reality television premise and all of that.
I've been saying it's like a cross between The Truman Show, and It's a Wonderful Life, and Knives Out. These are all movies, but you know what I mean? Yeah. It's got an ensemble cast, but a strange thing. And our friend Grace Green read it just for fun ahead of time. And this morning she got back to me and said, I can see a little Agatha Christie and a little Stephen King in this book.
Oh,
Was that
that's
nice?
exciting.
Yes. I was
Yeah,
like,
well, I
oh.
can't wait to read it. I'm excited. I was so jealous when you told me the premise. I was like, oh my God, that's going to be huge. So I
Yes.
know it's going to do really well.
So that one's called a limited run. So I've got this whole list of things that I want to do. And then when you publish yourself, so I have my own publishing company, Night Sky Press. So I'm like you, we do everything. I mean, everything from registering the ISBNs to filling out the form for the copyright, which is something I've always done is register the copyright. And I've only had to use it once with the Moonlight Child. On 3 different occasions, someone else represented it as their own. One person turned it into an app and used the exact file, my file, the interior of the book said by Karen McQuestion, and it had my logo and everything. And someone else was selling it as a book on Apple. And each time I contact these companies and say, that's a copyright violation. And they say, prove that it's yours. I mean, I always thought, my name is Karen McQuestion and it's by Karen McQuestion. But
Yeah.
so I take a picture of the copyright and a picture of my driver's license, which is like not anything you want out in the world, but and then they take it down, the fraudulent one. So all those little details that you have to take care of.
Yeah, and it keeps you busy for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we had an amazing guest on today. And of course, I was geeking out because I love historical fiction and she writes really wonderful books. So we were excited about that. So without any more of us babbling on, we'll let everybody enjoy the show.
Hello, everybody. Today we are excited to have Ellen Marie Wiseman with us. Ellen is the New York Times bestselling author of the highly acclaimed historical fiction novels, The Orphan Collector, What She Left Behind, The Plum Tree, Coal River, The Life She Was Given, and her newest, The Lost Girls of Willowbrook. Born and raised in 3 Mile Bay, a tiny hamlet in northern New York, she's a first-generation German-American who discovered her love of reading and writing while attending first grade in one of the last one-room schoolhouses in New York State. Since then, more than 1 million copies of her books have been sold in the United States. Her novels have been published worldwide, translated into 20 languages, and named to best of lists by Reading Group Choices, Good Housekeeping, Goodreads, the Historical Novel Society, Great Group Reads, and more. A mother of 2, Ellen lives on the shores of Lake Ontario with her husband and dog. Welcome, Ellen.
Well, thank you for having me.
We're so excited that you agreed to go on the show. And we would love to hear about your publishing journey. I understand you had a very imaginative childhood.
Oh yeah.
How did you go from there to becoming a published novelist?
Well, I was always a big reader when I was young, and I really loved Stephen King and Anne Rice and Dean Koontz and all those. And I did go to a little one-room schoolhouse, but I also went to a tiny school that was 400 kids from K through 12. And so there wasn't any creative writing courses offered. So I never really realized that was something that I would be interested in. And I didn't go to college either. So I just was a big reader. And sometimes I would read a book and think, I think I could write one better than that. So I started writing as a hobby when I was bringing up my children. And then when they went off to high school, I decided to get serious about it. And that's when one day I just knew that I had to write The Plum Tree, which is loosely based on my mother's experiences growing up in Germany during World War II. So I had all those family stories that I grew up hearing, and I just thought that they would make a good book. And so that's what I did.
That's amazing. So your new novel is titled The Lost Girls of Willowbrook. Can you tell us a little bit about the story and the inspiration behind it?
Sure. It's set at the real-life Willowbrook State School on Staten Island. That's the state institution that Geraldo Rivera did an expose on in the early 1970s. He got a key from one of the former doctors who was fired for trying to improve conditions. And then he went into the institution and he filmed it. And it brought widespread attention to the horrible conditions there, because Willowbrook was, really far from a school. It was more of a warehouse for mentally and physically disabled children. it was overcrowded, it was overstaffed, it was worn down, it was run over with disease and crime and all sorts of terrible things. And so even though Geraldo Rivera did the expose on it in the 1970s, it still took another 15 years for it to close. This story, The Lost Girls of Willowbrook, it follows a 16-year-old girl who has been told that her twin sister died of pneumonia 6 years earlier. And so she overhears her stepfather telling someone that her twin sister is actually missing from Willowbrook. And so she doesn't really know that much about Willowbrook. She just knows, she grew up hearing the rumors about it. Parents used to warn the kids they better behave or they'd be sent to Willowbrook and stuff. So she gets on a bus and goes to look for her sister because she wants to help with a search. And the doctors all think that she's her twin sister. And so they lock her up.
Well, if that doesn't make you want to read it, I don't know what will. That's an astounding premise. How did you come up with that?
Oh, gee, let's see. I knew that I wanted to write from the perspective of someone that was inside the institution, not someone that was just on the outside trying to help the people that were there, because I really wanted to get that intimate perspective of what it was really like to be a patient there. So, I had to figure out a way to get somebody in there. And so I came up with the idea of the mistaken twin identity.
Now, we got a copy of your book from your publicist, and it came with a sheet of all the things they're going to do to promote it. And it sounds to me like they are going all out with this book.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, I mean, and your previous books have done phenomenally well. What is it about this book, do you think, that takes it to another level?
Well, I think that, first of all, it wasn't really that long ago. It was in the 70s. I mean, 70s don't seem that long ago to me, but and I also think that, I really like to write about social injustices of the past that we haven't heard about. And I really didn't know about Willowbrook that much until I watched a documentary about Cropsey, which was an urban legend surrounding Willowbrook about a serial killer that was living in the tunnels. And so I just really wanted to bring this to people's attention. And, one of the doctors there called it a concentration camp. And I think, this is one of those things that we need to be reminded of and not forget about so that it doesn't happen again. And I think, obviously a lot of people, people that lived on Staten Island, they grew up hearing about it and stuff. I've already heard from people that said, the same thing happened to our family. We didn't know we had this sister that was in there, and found out later that, she was a patient there. So, it's like I wrote about an insane asylum and what she left behind. And I think people want to look at what happened from a safe distance. And so I think reading about those kinds of places helps them do that.
So do you think that's why you're drawn to writing historical novels?
Yeah, I'm really interested in things that we didn't learn about in school. I wrote about all sorts of things that we haven't learned about in school. And, I'm really fascinated by the resiliency of the human spirit. And also, I think that looking back and seeing what people have gone through maybe helps us be a little bit more grateful for the things that we're going through and realize that we can survive those things.
And what about research? Is that something you enjoy?
Oh yeah, I sometimes get carried away with the research. I usually buy 4 or 5 books on the subject that I'm working on, and read and take notes for a month or so, and then I start outlining. But yeah, it's really easy to get down a rabbit hole of research when you're looking up one little thing, and then 2 hours go by and you still haven't found it, but you found other interesting things.
Right. Well, and also the info dump, it's always challenging, I think, because you get excited about telling
Right.
telling the history of it, and then you're like, okay, but the story still needs to move forward.
Right. Yeah, you got to find a way to work it in there that makes it interesting.
Exactly. Yeah. So what does a writing day look like for you? Are you an outliner?
Oh yeah, I write on a deadline all the time. So I don't have like 6 months to, go down a thread that isn't going to work. And I really like to know the ending of a book before I start writing it. And sometimes I don't, which is really frustrating. But if I have an outline, then I kind of have a map to where I'm going. I don't always follow the outline exactly, because things change during the writing process, but I do like to outline ahead of time.
Now, your first book, The Plum Tree, came out in 2013. Has your writing process changed over the years?
I don't think so. I think I basically pretty much do it the same way. It seems to sometimes feel harder than it used to. Maybe because I'm on a deadline, When I wrote The Plum Tree, it took me like 6 years and I could just take my time. So,
Now people are waiting.
right.
That's
No
right.
pressure.
When's it coming? When's it coming? So do you share work in progress with anyone as you go along, or do you just finish it all up and send it off to your agent or editor?
I just finish it and send it to my agent. He's usually the first one that reads it. And sometimes he has some good suggestions and sometimes I listen to him and sometimes I don't. And but yeah, he's the first one that reads it and then my editor.
And isn't that nerve-wracking waiting to get the reaction of the first
It
readers?
is. It is.
How do you pick your titles?
Well, I haven't picked all of them. I've picked some and my editors picked some because some of the titles just come to me. Like The Orphan Collector actually came to me before I realized who The Orphan Collector actually was, which was really weird, but I was like, I just love this title and it just really worked. And luckily my editor loved it too. What She Left Behind, I had several different ideas and he came up with that title. So it's kind of a give and take, if he likes my title, he'll keep it. If not, then we kind of brainstorm together and we went through several title changes for the Lost Girls of Willowbrook, but I really think I really love the title. At first I was like, yeah, I like that, but now I love it. So it's kind of a fun process.
So is there a book you're dying to write but haven't yet?
Well, I have an idea for a book, but I'm not sure if I'm going to be allowed to write it. So, I really like to write about the Catholic priest scandals. I find that very intriguing. And I think that, I know a lot of people know about it, but I'd like to bring more attention to it if I could.
What is that inside you that has this compulsion to tell these stories? I'm very interested in that.
I'm not sure. I think I'm really good at putting myself in other people's shoes. Like with the Plum Tree, I grew up visiting my family in Germany because my mother came over here by herself in the 50s. And, she was 20 years old. She married an American soldier. And so I grew up visiting my family and hearing all these stories especially about the war. My grandfather was drafted and sent to the Russian front and he was captured and he escaped a POW camp. And my grandmother didn't know whether he was dead or alive for 2 years until he showed up on their doorstep one day. And they were really, really dirt poor. And I've been inside the bomb shelter where my mother hid as a child, this little tiny, awful place in the side of a hill. And my grandmother used to sneak out under the cover of night and put food out for the Jewish prisoners that were being marched by because there was a small air base outside the village. And so they would have the Jewish prisoners. They actually built a small camp for Jewish prisoners just to keep rebuilding this air base every time it got bombed. And they were actually marched right by my grandmother's house. And she risked her life to go out and put this food out in the street during the night so they could pick it up during the day. And she also hid her foreign broadcast radio. She hid it. And, it was illegal. And both of those were crimes punishable by death. And so I grew up hearing all these stories that my family went through. And then in high school, everybody was like, once they were learning about the Holocaust and stuff, they were like calling me a Nazi because they knew I was German. And so I think I just like to tell the other side of stories and just reveal things, and especially things that people haven't heard about, I really was compelled to write about the average German family, especially the women and children during the war, because a lot of people don't realize what they suffered too, So it just kind of snowballed into other things.
I think it's wonderful your parents and your grandparents too, it sounds like, shared their stories with you, because sometimes you hear that that's not the case.
Right. Especially when people go through something really difficult. I know that with Orphan Collector, concerning the Spanish flu, a lot of people said that their parents and their grandparents didn't want to talk about it. And I think it was just so horrific that especially when people would, catch it and die 12 hours later. And, it's really weird too, because since that book came out, everything, with COVID, it's some of the things that I talked about with the Spanish flu became irrelevant, as far as saying, oh my goodness, 695,000 Americans died during the Spanish flu. Well, we've gone way over that now. So it's really strange.
Have you ever started a novel manuscript and then made the deliberate decision not to finish it, to veer off course somehow?
When I was first writing as a hobby, I started a few different ones, but I was never, as motivated as I was to finish The Plum Tree. I just knew I had to write that one. But every novel that I've started since, I've finished, mostly because I've already signed a contract and my editor gave the idea. It's like, I kind of have to finish this.
Yeah, once you have a contract, the commitment is
Yeah.
there.
It's a whole
Yes,
different
there's
ballgame.
no escaping.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I'm wondering, are any of those partials that you started way back in the day, have you ever looked at them again?
We moved a few years ago and I was, and I haven't thrown them away. But because a lot back then I was writing longhand. So I do still have some of those. And yeah, I looked at them. It was like, some of it made me cringe. Some of it made me like, oh, that wasn't too bad.
Part of the process.
Yeah, and I was gonna say that never changes for me. I do that every time. So do you keep a list of story ideas as you think of them?
Yeah, I do. I do. And then, sometimes they kind of just peter out and then I just try to weed out the bad ones.
We have a fair number of listeners who are aspiring authors. Do you have a book, a craft book you'd recommend to beginners?
I would definitely say Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott. And On Writing by Stephen King is good too.
I was gonna say, I knew you were gonna say Stephen King since you were a fan. You must have been delighted when that book came out. You're like, oh, all the secrets. I'll finally learn them.
Right. Exactly.
How about marketing? We have a kind of a variety of authors on here. Some are self-published and some are traditionally published. And it seems like the marketing process is actually remarkably similar, even though, traditional has a publisher behind them. What do you do as far as marketing goes, or do you just leave that all up to your publisher?
Well, my publicist sets up a lot of things for me. I do a lot of online events, and especially over the last couple of years. And I do a lot of local, like visit a lot of local libraries and bookstores and things like that. But, obviously social media is a big thing. And I just really try to really interact with my readers online and always answer everybody and like their comments and things like that and let them know that I'm just, a regular person.
Do you have an ideal reader in mind when you write? We always use the example of Stephen King saying he thinks of his wife as he's writing his novels.
Well, oddly, I think I write for myself because I try to write what I would want to read. Or if I think, if I'm writing something, I think, oh, that would be cool if I was reading that and that happened. So it's like, I might as well just write it.
So do you feel like if you're feeling it or you're engaged by it, the reader's going to feel the same way?
Yeah, I hope so.
Do you ever have any doubts while you're writing or even after it's published?
All the time. All the time. Especially that first draft. That's a heck of a thing. But yeah, I have doubts constantly.
You mentioned a first draft. Do you write the whole thing and then go over it again, or are you constantly reworking the pages?
I try to get the whole thing out, but there are times where I have to go back and fix things. It's like if something comes to me that is a big part of the plot or whatever, I go back and add that or whatever. But yeah, I do kind of a combination both, but I try to get it out as fast as I can, but I'm not very fast.
What is the most gratifying part of being an author?
I think it's meeting the readers. I really love doing live events and meeting people in person and stuff. And I really missed that during the pandemic. Online was great because I really reached a lot of people, but it's just not the same as an audience. And you can really feel the interaction and the reactions to what you're saying. And I just love that part.
Yeah. Have you done any live events in the last 2 years?
I did one outside under tent. That was it. But I have quite a few lined up for this book, so I'm looking forward to that.
There's just something about the energy of interacting with people in person, I think, that it's hard to duplicate.
Yep.
What do you feel is the most gratifying part about being an author?
Well, probably, like I said, meeting the readers, but also I like making my mom proud and my kids proud. When I hit that New York Times bestseller list, which I never thought would ever happen to me, to be able to tell them that is really cool. And just the interactions with the readers and some of the letters that I get, and the fact that what I wrote has meant so much to so many people. because of the subjects that I write about, I get a lot of emails from people that say, my dad was a coal miner, or, my grandma lived through the war and I'm glad that you told that side of it. Or, I had a cousin that was in, Willowbrook State School, or, we lost somebody in the Spanish flu. It's just amazing to think that something that I wrote touches that many people.
You mentioned being on the New York Times list. Do you remember when you found out that you first made the list?
Oh, yeah. It's funny because I was not expecting it in a million years. And 3 of my grandkids were here and we're just getting ready to go swimming in the pool. And my oldest granddaughter said, some John guy called. My editor's name is John. And he said to call him back. And so I called him back and it was just, I couldn't. He said something like, we get the list for the New York Times on Wednesdays. And I was like, he's not going to say that. And then he said it.
Wow. That must have been so exciting.
Yeah. My grandkids were like, I was crying, but they knew it was happy tears, and my 8-year-old grandson, he says, Grandma, you're famous,
That's so cute. That's the best when your family acknowledges that or thinks it's special. Yeah.
So did you do something special to celebrate at that point besides swim in the pool?
Oh, yeah. I got in the pool and I was daydreaming. I don't really remember. Well, it was during the pandemic. We didn't really do stuff, I called all my friends and everybody and made a Facebook announcement.
Yeah. That's too bad. It was during the pandemic. You could have had a party.
I know.
I am curious how, with all the research and, the kind of depth of your books, how long does it take from start to finish usually to finish a manuscript?
Well, when my agent sold The Plum Tree, I signed a 2-book deal and I had less than a year to write What She Left Behind. But every time I sign a contract, it's for 2 books. And so my agent asks for a little bit more time. So the 3rd and the 4th one, I had a year and a half. And then The Orphan Collector and The Lost Girls of Willowbrook, I've had 2 years for each of those, which sounds like a long time, but it's not.
Well, because the research is so exhaustive, don't you think?
Yeah, that has a lot to do with it. Yeah.
And are you a stickler for accuracy?
Oh, yeah, I am. I will hear about it if I get something wrong. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. People love to find those. Yeah.
Yeah, I also want to be accurate,
Especially because the subject matters that you've chosen, have really happened.
Right.
You want to make sure you do justice to those. I can see that for sure.
Yeah. And they're very serious subjects, so.
Absolutely. Yeah. On those days when you're not feeling the muse, what do you do?
I just power through. I just keep writing and hope that it figures itself out while I'm going. And if not, I always know that I can go back and fix it. But yeah, I just try to keep working.
Keep adding words and pages. Now, you had mentioned your family before. Do they read your books?
Yeah, my daughter is a big reader, so she does. My husband's not that big a reader. He says the only books he's ever read are mine, but I don't think he's read The Orphan Collector yet. So, and my mom has read all of them, of course.
Oh, bless her heart, right?
Yeah.
Moms are great.
She's my biggest fan.
Yeah. How consumed are you with the story when you're in the middle of it?
I'm really pretty consumed. It's easier than it used to be to switch. When I was the first few books, it was like I had a hard time switching from being in the writing and in the story, and then answering the phone or switching back to real life. It's a little bit easier for me now because it still takes me some time to get back into it once I'm out, but
I always wonder about authors and how they choose names. And in The Lost Girls of Willowbrook, the twins are named Sage and Rosemary. So how do you go about choosing the names of your characters?
For the good characters, I always like to pick names that I like. And I've always liked the name Sage. I don't know why. And at first, Rosemary's name was Saffron, Sage and Saffron. But I thought that's too close with the 2 S's. You get them mixed up. Because as I was writing, I was getting them mixed up. And so I actually asked on Facebook, I asked my readers, for a twin name that goes with Sage, and the most popular one was Rosemary. And it really just worked out. Pia in The Orphan Collector is one of my cousin's names in Germany. And I was just really like that name. And so the other lesser characters, those are harder for me. I want to pick things that work and sound good. And one of my favorite names that I picked out was for a bad guy in Coal River. and his name was Hazard Flint.
Oh, I love it.
So, yeah,
That's a good one.
yeah.
So I'm intrigued by the fact that you asked your readers on your Facebook page to weigh in. Is that something you do often?
Not a lot, but I do always tell my readers that if they have any ideas for me, about things in the past that I might not know about or whatever. And that actually is how I came up with the idea for the Orphan Collector, because a retired nurse had asked me if I'd heard of the Spanish flu, and I had heard of it, but I didn't really realize what a big deal it was. And then she asked me if I had heard of the visiting nurses in Philadelphia. And so once I got researching that, it kind of got my wheels turning. So I do love to ask my readers for ideas and names. And sometimes, I have a hard time coming up with a word, and it's like, what is that word? So I ask them that.
I'm glad to hear you say that, because when I think that, I immediately think I'm getting dementia. It's like, how can I be a writer and I don't know the words?
I know.
Oh,
I always say it's a good thing I don't work with words for a living, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So can you tell us what you're working on now, or is it a secret? I know you're promoting the current book, but yeah.
Yes, I'm very hard at work at promoting the Lost Girls of Willowbrook. I also signed another contract. So I'm working on a book about eugenics in America.
Oh, that sounds intriguing and horrible and wonderful and interesting.
I know.
Yeah.
It's amazing. The research it's such a big subject. And so trying to squeeze it down into a story, but it's just amazing some of the things that happened, and especially how it ties into what the Nazis did.
Do you think that's the value in historical novels, that you take something that would seem very dry in a textbook and you're able to put a personal spin on it and let people experience it through the fictional world?
Yeah, and I think that it's, I try really hard to keep the reader entertained so that there is a story that they're interested in, but they're maybe learning about some things along the way. I mean, I was not a big history nerd in high school at all. But when I read, a historical novel, it just brings it to life, and it just makes it more interesting.
Yeah, because then it's about people instead of just here's some facts and dates and, this is when the
Exactly.
battle of such and such happened.
Exactly.
Is there anything else you want to tell us about the new book?
Well, I think that, it's important to realize that the rights for disabilities is still ongoing. And, I hope that the book will remind us that we need to be more protective of the most vulnerable among us. And, they deserve as many rights in life as we do, and they deserve to be treated with kindness and compassion. And so I think that's really important. But I hope that people will also, be inspired how Sage can turn like heartbreak into something good and things like that.
Do you have a theory about why it took so long after the expose for things to change, or that it carried on that way is amazing to me.
I know. Well, first of all, the government was involved. So, it was all that red tape. And they had to move all these people into smaller homes and smaller, community-based homes and things like that. And there was 6,000 people living there when it closed, and anywhere from adults to children, because the children that were put there when they were young, they grew up. So there was adults there too. And, back then there was such a stigma surrounding mental and physical disabilities that a lot of the parents were encouraged by the doctors to put them in there for the sake of the family. It also became a place for kids that were dropped off that had, were perfectly normal, because sometimes foster homes couldn't place children, or they said they used to find kids like at Grand Central Station with a sign around their neck that said, "Take me to Willowbrook." And so that's what they did. And I also read that some parents who had some problem children, if they were rich enough, they could pay for their IQ test to be lowered so they would be admitted. So I think, they had to sort through all of these 6,000 people and figure out who should go where, and paperwork. They did change the name eventually. And so I think it's mostly just red tape and the job of moving that many people.
It's hard to believe that this happened in the scheme of things so recently. I mean, it sounds like it from a Charles Dickens novel or something.
And there's a lot of other institutions the same around the United States, but Willowbrook was the largest one and had the most attention because of the Geraldo Rivera expose.
During your research, were you able to find a lot of interviews with the people who had actually been living there? Or was it more the people who'd been working there? Like, how did it unfold, I guess is my question.
Well, I bought several books, and the one that was really the most helpful was co-authored by one of the doctors that worked there, Dr. Bronston. It's called The History and Sociology of Willowbrook State School. And it was a heartbreaking book, probably some of the hardest research I've done. And I write about, some pretty difficult subjects. But it was fascinating at the same time to read about how this place got to where it was. It was 350 acres. It was completely underground, closed off from the public. And so it kind of developed its own hierarchy in society, which just added to the problems. The staff didn't trust the nurses because the nurses would report to the administration. And, they were so short staffed that they would just hire anybody without any background checks. And this everyday staff, the people that had to just take care of these poor, I want to keep saying inmates because Dr. Bronston called them inmates because he's the one that called it a concentration camp. The people that had to just do this daily feeding, cleaning, bathing, just watching these people every day, there was so few of them. And if somebody saw somebody else doing something wrong, they were afraid to tell on them because they'd get their tires slashed or they'd get beat up in the parking lot. There was just this whole society thing. I mean, they could buy and sell drugs and meat and jewelry and it was just this underground city. So it was just
like a prison.
Right. And the other thing too that I am really excited about, I'm doing some events. I'm doing an event on Staten Island at Barnes & Noble with Dr. Bronston.
Oh,
who
really?
Was one of he worked there and he's called me several times and he read the book and he was just blown away by it. But also, so I'm really excited about talking to him about this, but also the doctor that gave Geraldo Rivera the key, Dr. Wilkins, he read the book too. And he was really blown away. He said that it made him realize that he was starting to heal from the experience because, they had post-traumatic stress from working there. And it also made him really proud that he was part of the change that made it happen. So I'm really excited I'm going to be meeting both of them in the fall.
I love hearing that. That's fiction can change lives.
Yeah.
You've done that.
The other thing too that's really amazing is that, and I had no idea when I wrote the book, that this is the 50th anniversary of Geraldo Rivera's expose and the 35th anniversary of it closing. And they're opening what's called the Willowbrook Mile on Staten Island, which the College of Staten Island is on the former grounds of Willowbrook State School.
And is that like a memorial?
Yeah.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
Now in the book, visitors to the patients were not allowed past like the front entry. They couldn't go in the living quarters. Is that how it actually was?
Yes.
So people never knew how horrible the conditions were.
Right. Well, they eventually learned because some of the doctors, and like I said, or like I want to say, is that all the doctors, all the nurses, all the staff were not bad. It's just like any place, some people did terrible things and some people did good things. And, I read about some of the staff would use their own money to buy deodorant and clothes and things like that for the patients. So some of the staff and some of the doctors, got the parents together and told them what was going on. It wasn't because they saw it firsthand, although, sometimes they'd go see their child or whatever, and they'd have a broken arm or a bruised face and they'd, ask what happened and, they'd get brushed off and things like that. So there was some movement to try to change things. It was just impossible.
Well, on a lighter note, we have fun extra questions at the end that are not necessarily writing related, but we think they're fun. So, what is one food that will never get past your lips?
Well, the first food I thought of was oysters, so I think I'll have to stick with that.
Who would you want to play you in a movie?
Meryl Streep's my favorite, so it'd have to be her.
What superpower would you pick given the opportunity?
It's kind of a toss-up between flying and like super strong.
On this show, you can have both.
Yeah, you can have both. Yeah. Yeah. What's your biggest guilty pleasure?
Probably binge watching some TV shows.
What is the worst job you've ever had?
That's a toss-up between scrubbing the bottom of boats with chore boys or mowing lawn for 8 hours a day at a state park.
If you could instantly become an expert in something, what would it be?
Can I say writing books?
That was my answer.
Playing the piano.
Oh, okay, that's a good one. What's your favorite smell?
I live on the lake, so I'd have to say it's the lake in the summertime. Or lilacs. I like lilacs too.
What's the most terrifying thing you've ever done?
Oh, gee. That was the one that really threw me. Does getting held up at gunpoint count?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't do it. Somebody else did it, but that was the most terrifying thing. I got robbed at gunpoint when I was working at a state park toll booth.
Oh, have you ever used that in any of your books? Probably
I
not.
haven't. I haven't yet, but I should.
Yeah. What's one thing you're really bad at?
Saying no. Especially to my kids and grandkids.
Yeah, Karen and I feel that one. And finally, if you could live your life over again, would you want to?
Certain parts. Most of it, yes. Some of it, no.
All right. Well, this was amazing. We're so thrilled that you were able to join us today, and we wish you all the luck with the book.
Well, I had a great time talking to you guys, and I really appreciate you having me.
Before we sign off, we should say, when does The Lost Girls of Willowbrook come out?
Oh, that would be a good idea, wouldn't it? Yeah, it comes out on August 30th. And people can pre-order a signed copy from the Rivers End bookstore in Oswego. They have a website.
All right, great. All right, well, best of luck.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Behind the Book, brought to you by authors Tess Thompson and Karen McQuestion. They hope you found it entertaining and informative. If you loved it, tell your friends. And if you have a moment, they'd love for you to post a star rating or review. This has been Behind the Book.